Hello everyone, welcome to the first stream of the Design Lab, my new stream series where I am going to be sharing much more kind of out of the box, more ambitious, weirder, or very much early in process ideas that I have about game design, especially but not exclusively for use with the Daggerheart rules. Today's thing is related to Daggerheart and for use with those rules, but I want to leave myself the space to throw some other cool stuff out there. Part of the idea with the design lab is to be a little bit clearer and delineate when I am noodling at the edges of stuff versus when I am engaging more directly with the Daggerheart rules as is in terms of building stuff very solidly within the design space that is set by the SRD, or where I'm just extending it in more limited fashion, or the streams that I do that are more advice driven, especially the ones that are like not Daggerheart specific, right? This is just GMing advice based on how I see and approach the game. So today we are going to focus very much on design, and I'm excited to share this idea that I've been developing for a couple of months now, and I've done a tiny bit of playtesting with one of my groups, but as I shifted into playtesting Drakkenheim, that took priority. I'm going to share it here. I'm hoping to get some feedback, and then I'm going to continue to work on it, and we'll see where this idea ends up going. As is standard with the streams that I do where we're engaging with the Daggerheart rules, right? We've got our community gaming content logo up here, and we've got our disclaimer. In these streams, I am speaking only for myself. I am not speaking on behalf of Darrington Press or Critical Role, just talking about how I see and interesting things that I want to do using those rules within the bounds of the SRD and the community gaming license and, all that above board stuff. So this can go, that can go away. To start, I want to talk just a little bit about what the design deck is, or what the inspiration deck is, and then I have a basic interface for it set up in Roll20 that I'm going to jump over to, and we can see a little bit of how the Deckbuilder part of this operates. The best tool for this would probably be playing in Tabletop Simulator, but I am not yet so fluent in Tabletop Simulator that I've been able to make all the stuff for it. So instead, we're still going to use the deck features in Roll20 using one of the Roll20 games because it's stuff that I've already built up. So the idea for the inspiration deck is to take things that I think are already cool and interesting about Daggerheart and add a subsystem that emphasizes and supports groups in engaging with that part of the game. Specifically, the inspiration deck is meant to support, inspire, and encourage players to take on some authority, right? Some shared narrative authority to become co-storytellers and take the mic, adding to the world of the story in their descriptions or in suggesting plot beats, interpreting the roles, the roll results for different dice rolls and things like that. And that the inspiration deck gives you really specific prompts in which you will kind of exert or exercise that narrative authority, and then it gives you a corresponding mechanical bonus. The idea being that in a game of Daggerheart, players are already encouraged to, at certain times, describe what happens, introduce details, help paint the scene, talk about or establish elements of world building and things like that. That is generally just a part of the flow of play. But what I was thinking is that if there was an extra element or an extra part of this loop, this play loop, that included a tactile and mechanical element that is meant to enhance and go alongside the existing practice and the existing behaviors in a way that then rewards those behaviors. It might be something that some groups really like, either because it helps them be able to do that shared storytelling because it gives really specific narrow prompts, and because it makes some of that process some of the time a special cool thing that gets its own bonus, right? Where in a given table, the GM may ask the players to describe something or kind of pass the mic around, but some of the time when a GM will give a prompt or ask a question, a player might feel a little overwhelmed because maybe there's too many options, or they get like decision paralysis, or they have what is sometimes referred to as like white page syndrome, where there's too many possibilities and they don't know where to start. The inspiration deck then gives specific and then most notably repeatable types of prompts for players to engage with as part of the flow of play. So that's a little bit of the kind of the top level. The other thing that the inspiration deck subsystem does right now is it encourages players to spend hope, because that is a behavior that I've seen some groups or some folks on like the subreddit talk about. Oh, my players don't want to use hope because they want to have hope for this ability, or they want to have it so they can use their hope special feature whenever they want. The inspiration deck subsystem rewards you for spending your hope. Spend your resources or use your resources is one of the player principles. I think it's a best practice in the core rulebook. It's one of the two of those. They kind of live together in my brain. So the goal really is take a part of play that some groups may struggle with, provide some tools that should hopefully make that process run more smoothly, and just give some cool bits to engage with that other groups may find fun, even if the making prompts part is not as important for them, because it's a group that's already more comfortable with that type of passing the mic, sharing of authority and storytelling control, right? The narrative agency part. So that's the overview. A quick shout out to Hack Shack Games for following the channel. Unless it's two people with the same name, Hack Shack Games is also a creator working in the Daggerheart compatible space. So thanks so much for your support, and hope to see you in a stream or your comments in a YouTube at some point if you feel like it. No worries. Lurking is totally cool and all good. So we are going to jump over to my Roll20 here, and everything is still looking good. So I've got these decks down here. Now, notably, the final product of the inspiration deck will not use this logo, because this is right. This is a bit of trade dress for Daggerheart, the game itself. So this is only for example purposes, right? This version of this is not getting merchandised or sold at all, right? This is only for example purposes. A thing I want to do is commission new Daggerheart-esque card backs, very much in the spirit or in a similar vein to this here, which is a card back from a card created by Many Worlds Tavern, a coffee and tea company. I stopped at their booth at PAX Unplugged and picked up some of their coffee, which I've given to my wife, and some of the cards that go with it, including stuff like this one, right, where they have their own card back and they're using the community creation logo on the back, which is definitely the thing to do if you're publishing things using the CGL. So I've got a couple of things on the screen here. We see that there is a countdown. For my Roll20 games, I use clocks that I already have from running like Blades in the Dark and things. for your VTT, right, you might have a die that you can manipulate, and you use countdown dice, very much in keeping with how countdowns are described in the game, right? Especially some of the adversary features will have you roll a die to set your countdown. I use these clocks because it's what I have on hand and it's pretty easy for me. But we'll get back to the countdown part in just a moment. So some basic stuff here. If you're not familiar with Deckbuilder games, I'm going to be drawing on some of the design technology and some of the customs, like best practices in Deckbuilder design in this, even though the type of deck builder I'm creating here is really different than something you would see in the game, like in Dominion or Slay the Spire or Balatro or things like that, because this is a subsystem rather than a core system. And what I mean by that is the inspiration deck is something that you add, and it sits kind of on top of the normal systems of Daggerheart, and then interacts directly with a couple of those systems, but in such a way that you can then peel it back off of the game and the game still functions. It integrates with the existing function of the game rather than replacing core elements of the game. That's how I see and how I'm designing this inspiration deck system to operate, right? It's an add-on thing rather than, instead of X rule, we use Y rule. So I have two decks here. I have the Inspiration Draft Supply, and then I have my Core Inspiration deck. The idea with this subsystem is that at the start of a campaign, when players are making their characters, one of the things that you do in Session 0 is you take the Inspiration card for your character's class, and all of those go into a pile, and they create the starting inspiration deck, right? The core of your inspiration deck, and then you add other cards to it. So in this imaginary game, right, we have a rogue, a druid, a guardian, and a ranger, right? We have 4 player characters. I'm just going to move these down here a little bit more. So each of these inspirations is themed in keeping with or along the same like content thematic axis as I view the class design to be, right? So if we look at, how do I just want to make this big. All right, so we're going to make it big. I'll just do it this way. All right, Rogue's Inspiration. So I'm using the card creator structure from the Daggerheart website in a version where this becomes commercial, right? I would want to get some custom graphic design on this, right? Because the word inspiration is a little long for this box, just because of how things are. So inspiration cards are not domain cards. They are not an ancestry or a community card, right? They're a separate type of card. They have their title here, Rogue's Inspiration, for instance, and then it gives you the game text. This is basically, when does this apply? What do you do? And what happens when you do it? Rogue's Inspiration says, flash back to a time within the last day when you made preparations for this moment. You may make one action roll in this flashback, which cannot override what has already been established in the story, but can give it new context. This is effectively, but not quite the same as a Blades in the Dark flashback. If you are familiar with that game, you know that it has a flashback system because it is a heist kind of game, and flashing back to having already come up with an answer for an expected challenge is like an appropriate thing genre-wise. Well, the rogue is kind of a class that overlaps some with the fantasy of that type of story. And so the rogue's inspiration, which can be used by any character, not just a rogue, but if you have a rogue in your party, the idea is that they will inspire certain types of behaviors and capabilities, almost like they are giving an extra power to other characters in the group. So you can draw this and use it. I'll go over how you draw and use the cards in just a moment. I want to kind of walk through some example cards real quick. The Druid's inspiration says, describe how an animal or natural phenomenon intervenes in the scene to present you with an opportunity for action. Take advantage on following through with that action. So you describe something, adding to the world of the story, and then you get advantage on making an action roll that follows through with that opportunity or like benefit that was granted by this thing that you've introduced to the story. And these are to be used by players so that they are getting to add to and change the world of the story. So it takes a thing that players are already going to be asked to do sometimes and describe or add to the world of the story, but it gives it bounds and it gives you a specific mechanical bonus for when you do it. So these are the 4 cards that are the core of your inspiration deck. You're going to get to draw and use those throughout play. Not a Hag says, I used an inspiration card inspired by your design in my game already, and it made my players very excited. You expect them to be hit. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you were inspired to try something out in your game, and I'm glad that your players liked it. Right, this is still fairly early in design, but I really feel that I'm onto something because of the way that it plays directly to a player behavior that the game, as I interpret it, wants to encourage. It's kind of just a little bit of extra structure and guidance for things that I think the game already asks for. So to use inspiration cards, let's just pretend that this is your whole deck, and we'll come back to building more of the deck and some of the other deck buildery parts in a couple of minutes. We see this countdown here. During play, at the start of each story arc in Daggerheart for your campaign, you reset the inspiration countdown to a value of 2 plus the number of player characters in the group, right? So this is a party of 4, which is why we have the 4 class inspiration cards. And so this is a countdown of 6. Every time any PC spends hope, you advance this countdown, right? So somebody spends a hope on an experience, the countdown goes to 5. Somebody does a tag team roll, 1, 2, 3. That's 3 hope, so the countdown goes down to 2. Somebody spends a hope to assist an ally, we're down to 1. And then maybe somebody spends a hope to activate a feature, and the countdown goes to 0, or it triggers. What happens then is the person who spent that last hope draws the top card of the inspiration deck. And for our examples, right, that inspiration deck is these 4 cards. So I'm going to recall my cards, and then we're going to deal 1 card to me because I'm the person who's, yes. You already have a deck. What are you talking about? Shuffle. This is why I said that I want to use Tabletop Simulator, because the card part is a little bit smoother. So I drew Druid's Inspiration. So that player that spent the last hope would draw the card, and they would kind of show it to the whole group, because the inspiration cards that you draw are shared by the group. At any time when the prompt could be used and the players have the spotlight, a player can say, hey, I want to use Druid's Inspiration. These cards are meant to be used with the kind of unanimous consent of the table. If somebody at the group doesn't want the card to get used because maybe they think that there's another use coming up really soon, then the players have to talk it out And if the players can't come to an agreement, the GM is generally going to say, hold off on playing the card for now. When you play the card, you kind of read it out, do what it says, which is normally describe something that you're adding to the world of the story or that you're establishing, defining, and then there's a mechanical impact. Then that card goes to a discard, right? If we imagine the deck here, that card gets discarded. The inspiration card that you spent doesn't go back into the deck instantly. So you can draw cards, play them, and then you keep going in your deck. Right now, I have it such that your deck gets reshuffled at the start of a story arc. One of the things I want to test is how quickly does a group go through their deck versus how long is a story arc for a group. In games that I've run, sometimes a story arc has lasted 6 or 7, maybe 8 sessions. And if we were using the inspiration deck during that arc, there's a decent chance that those inspiration cards might have been all used before the finale or the climax of that arc. So one of the things I have to decide is, do you automatically reshuffle the deck and keep going within a given story arc, or is the deck a limited resource per story arc where you play through the deck one time but you don't get to reshuffle until the next story arc starts? Daggerheart notably has story arcs written into the rules because it talks about how you're encouraged to have the player characters level up at the end of a story arc. And I'm very much playing into this design idea, right? That you have access to this deck across a story arc. What that also means is that each of these inspiration cards would activate or show up a maximum of one time across a story arc. A thing that I probably don't want to happen would be for certain inspiration cards to be a lot more popular than others, and groups are just burning through inspiration cards to get back to the same one and use it again and again. Because if the way that the story plays out is that, something, an animal or a plant or something in nature is always coming in to make everything better, does that make that narrative move? Does that make that trope less interesting, or does it become stale? This is one of the things I'm going to want to test. If you don't get to reshuffle, right, you use each of these a max of one time across a story arc, and then you're encouraged to complete the story arc so that you can, 1, probably level up, and 2, reshuffle your deck and get to use these cards again. When this inspiration countdown triggers, right, when it hits 0, you draw a card and then you reset it to its maximum. So in our group of 4 player characters, it would reset to 6, 2 plus the 4 player characters in the group. So every 6 hope that this group spends, they draw an inspiration card that they hold as a group. Having these be physical cards when you're playing in person, 1, means that it's easier to remember that these are a thing that you want to use. And 2, it makes this element feel like it fits alongside the other tactile elements of play, right? Where you have tokens that you roll alongside your dice. You have maybe tokens that you're using to represent your hope. You're maybe putting tokens on something to mark stress. The physicality of the game is an important element to me, especially it's one of the things that really makes a difference for me between when I'm playing online and when I'm playing in person. When I'm playing in person, the tactile element of the cards and the dice and the tokens really becomes noticeable for me, and it's something that I appreciate. So I want this subsystem to add to that and make use of the physicality that the game already has by saying, okay, well, you're playing with cards. Here's an interesting other way of playing with cards that can just sit on top of what the game is already doing. Pardon me for a second as I adjust and take a drink. Okay, so we know how you start building your inspiration deck. We know what this countdown is about, and we know what it's like when we play inspiration cards. Thank you for the donation, Not a Hag, contributing to the cult's totem. I toast the cult of sharing spotlight, because that's the thing that we did when this behavior was discovered. And thank you to Arrowed again for following the channel. Great name. So you don't just have your class inspiration cards in this system. When you start the game during session 0, you are also going to draft some cards, right? Drafting is a thing that you do in a deck building game. If you play Magic and go to like draft tournaments, you'll understand the idea of drafting. A number of card games also do drafting. Something like Sushi Go has drafting. But when you start the campaign, right, you're going to have your four cards for your party of 4. We're just going to make these kind of close enough to one another. But you also draft from another set of cards that are not class specific. These are the inspiration draft supply, right? They're what you draft from. Right now, I have 2 tiers of draft supply, right? The idea being that there's a set of cards that you draft from when you are at tier 1 and tier 2, that is levels 1 through 4. And then you have an advanced draft supply that is for tiers 3 and 4 when you are at levels 5 through 10. This all may change. I'm just kind of sharing where I am at the moment. So when you draft at the beginning of the campaign, you draft a number of cards from the card supply equal to the number of players, and then you pick. So this should actually be draw. I'm reading from my draft. So we're going to draw 4 cards. So I'm going to put these up here for now. Anyway, they're a little bit of a mess. So because we have 4 players, we've drawn 4 cards. And so I'm just going to read a couple of these so you have a sense of what non-class inspiration cards look like. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So, Moment of Brilliance. When a PC is making an action roll, describe how feelings of friendship, affection, protectiveness, or something else pushes the character beyond their limits. Replace your hope die with a d20 until your next roll with fear or the end of the scene, right? So this groundswell, this bursting up of emotions strengthens your ability to tap into the power of hope. So your hope die becomes a d20. And it stays a d20 until you roll with fear, which is less likely because your hope die is a d20 instead of a d12. But it will end at the end of the scene, right? This moment of brilliance might last the rest of the scene, but it will recede, right? So it can't be an almost permanent bonus. A lot of the things that might come up here are probably going to end at the end of a scene or at the end, like when there's the next rest, just because that's how a lot of these ongoing but not constant effects operate. Arrowed again asks, sorry if I missed this, but are these cards part of an upcoming campaign frame or project? So the inspiration deck, which is what these are part of, is a new project of mine that I'm working on kind of on my own, right? It's on spec. It does not have a publisher or anything like that. I have shared drafts of it on my Patreon. So folks that don't know, I share a lot of work in progress or other Daggerheart compatible ideas at my Patreon at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. The inspiration deck does not have a publishing home yet. It is one of my bigger, weirder ideas. If you are a publisher and you think that this is interesting, please reach out. I'm happy to talk. So it is not associated with any particular campaign frame. My goal would be that, right, if I find a publishing partner or come to the point where I'm publishing this, I would want to think about how might other people make inspiration cards? How can I make that easy? How can I make it so that this is something that people can weave into their own games or their own projects? Some of exactly how to do that will be something I determine later on, but I definitely want, when this gets out into the world, to be something that people can build on themselves. I have had some thoughts about like frame or adventure specific cards. That's still very, very preliminary. So it will probably show up on Patreon first. I don't know that I'll be showing it off today. So that's one of these cards. Let's do one more. This one is also very RP-ish, and it's an Easter egg if you know my own personal social history. So there is a folk song called Health to the Company that is a common, it's commonly played at events of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is a group that I was a part of for 5 or so years in my 20s. And so, right, the song goes, "Here's a health to the company and one to my lass." And it's basically, let's drink and be merry together because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Let's appreciate one another and this company that we have, right? It's like social company, not like corporate company. Health to the Company says, during a long rest, as a downtime action, describe something you do to raise the group's spirits. A song you sing, a story you tell, something special you prepare. You and all allies present gain 2 hope as if you had each prepared with another PC. So what this means is normally when you prepare during downtime, you take one action, you talk about how you're preparing for the challenges ahead, and you gain 1 hope. Or if 2 or more player characters each spend one of their downtime actions preparing, and you're preparing together, each of you would gain 2 hope. What this card does is it asks you to make sure and be specific about what it is you're doing to cheer everybody up. It's not exactly a prepare action, but it is parallel to it. And for one person taking one action, everybody, including the person who takes the action, gains 2 hope. So it's like a super prepare. Right? It's mostly using existing rules, but asking you to, do a little bit of narration and then giving an enhanced or expanded effect to the party. So if this were the start of a campaign, right, we'd have these 4 cards, and as a group, the players would select a number of cards equal to half the number of players in the game, rounded up. So we've drawn 4 cards, and then they would draft and add 2 of these cards to the inspiration deck. That's before session 1. This is during session 0. So if we said that we were going to add Health to the Company and Moment of Brilliance to the inspiration deck, right, then physically we would take these cards, put them in the discard pile, and then we'd shuffle everything together at the start of the storyline so that your 6 cards in the inspiration deck would be your one each of your class inspiration cards, and then the 2 cards you have drafted, Moment of Brilliance and Health to the Company. So when you draw a card from the inspiration deck, having completed that countdown, you don't know what card you're going to get. At the very beginning, there's a 2 in 3 chance that you're going to draw a class inspiration card. But then you have these other inspiration cards. They all do the same kind of thing structurally in that they ask you to do a bit of role play or narration, and then there is a mechanical impact. Certain cards may be more useful in different situations than others, and that's totally fine. But you draw and play these cards over the course of your arc. After you draft, right, the the cards that were not selected, I think, let me double check what I've written. The ones that are not picked, I think, are added to the bottom of the inspiration deck, right? So you're going to, the draft supply, sorry, so that you get a chance to draft all the other cards again before you see these same cards again. Some of the details on what happens when, right? This is all very much TBD. This is where things are right now in this subsystem. So if I, let's see how difficult this is to do. So if I want to add a card, I'm going to jump back here as I add a card, because otherwise it would show you my file architecture, and I don't want to do that on a stream, just from a privacy standpoint. Let's see where these are. So what I'm doing right now in Roll20 is I am adding cards to the deck that is the inspiration deck. Now I've found the folder, so this adding the second one is much easier. Okay. So we come back here, and then I'm going to recall all the cards. These are cards right from the draft supply, so I'm going to recall all of them as well. This is not exactly how it would work. I'm just doing this in a way that's a little bit more expedient. Now I shuffle the deck, and if we draw a new card, then there should be a decent chance. Yep, here we are, Moment of Brilliance. So one of the cards that I added from the draft supply when we drew cards at during session 0 is in the inspiration deck, and it ended up being the card that we drew when we completed the inspiration countdown. And with amazing timing, thank you to Arid again for subscribing to the channel with Prime. I appreciate the support, and it made for a great sound effect that fits in with how we're talking about the use of the deck, right? And so there's 6 cards in the deck. I've drawn 1. There's 5 more here. I recall the cards. I shuffle them. And so with 6 cards in the deck at level 1, if you don't get to reshuffle during the story arc, you have 6 of these cards that you get to use that will give you a special benefit over the course of the story arc. Every time you, like when you level up, you're going to draft cards, but it's not the only time you get to draft cards, because this is one of the fun things. I was trying to figure out when is it cool to get to add cards to your deck? What types of moments would make sense to be when you would add cards? One of the things that I'm aware of with this process is that it pauses play, right? You go, okay, we have to draft cards, right? We put cards out, and then you're engaging with them. And so I mostly didn't want there to be a lot of times when you would pause in the middle of a scene to draw cards. But there's one instance that I think is cool. Sorry, I'm adjusting here because I was sitting forward in the chair and it was getting to bother my back. So you add cards when the PCs gain a level, and we'll come back to that. And you add, or let me say it this way, when a new player character joins the game, you will add their class inspiration card if it's not already in the deck, right? If you start your campaign and you have 2 guardians, right now, I don't think you put 2 Guardians Inspiration cards in the deck. That also means that you wouldn't need to have 2 copies of the deck as like a product. And I think that I prefer the idea that one table can have 1 inspiration deck and then that will be enough, right? If this becomes a commercial thing, I'm fine with the idea that it's mostly GMs that are buying it, because that's how it ends up being for a lot of table level resources. So that's probably fine. The one time right now that I have it that you do draft during play or right during a scene is that the first time in the campaign that each PC makes a death move, that PC's player draws 3 cards from the draft supply at their tier and picks 1 to add to the inspiration deck. And they put it at the bottom of the deck, right? A death move, specifically the first time each character makes a death move, then is a turning point or is a key moment over the course of the campaign. And this emphasizes that. Plus, it suggests the idea that the player or the party writ large learns a lesson or gains access to a certain type of inspiration because of the key moment that created that character's death move, right? When you make a death move, your character doesn't necessarily die. If you survive and face and accept the consequences, you automatically survive. If you risk it all, you might live. If you go out in a blaze of glory, you don't live, but the rest of your group maybe takes a lesson from the way that you went out. So a group can interpret the choice. Basically, they can take the fiction as inspiration for which of these cards to add to their deck. Like, oh, because this character did this, we should definitely pick this one card. That's not the only way you can do this, right? This is a system that is meant to enhance the fiction, but I think it's probably more useful if it is inspired and triggered by the fiction, but does not necessarily have to live only ever within the world of the fiction, because it is also, it kind of plays on the level of the meta currencies, right? Fate, or the meta currencies of hope and fear, where they emerge from the fiction, but they don't necessarily live only in the world of the fiction because they have this ongoing mechanical reality and mechanical life that they live in. I may change my mind. We'll see. So if you do a death move, you would draw 3 cards. And then I would go, okay, the bigger they are, Hope's beautiful daughters, and a friend of mine lives here. So I'm going to say that a character took a death move, had to do a death move because they were fighting a huge enemy. The bigger they are says, when you deal damage to a bruiser, leader, or boss type adversary, describe how you use their size or confidence against them and add 2d6 to your damage roll, right? So a player character is fighting a big or kind of a creature or an adversary that is big in presence, if not form. And a lesson that they take away from it is using that size or confidence against the enemy, right? And so then I add the bigger they are to my deck. I'm not going to go ahead and do that because it is a little bit trickier of a process than if I could just take the card, put it in that deck, and have it reshuffled together. So that's one of the ways you can add to the deck. The second way is, right, again, when a PC joins the party, you add their class inspiration card to the deck if it's not already represented in the deck. And then the last one is probably the one that's going to happen most often. When the PCs gain a level, draw a number of cards from the draft supply equal to 2 plus the number of PCs. So that would be 6 cards in this instance, right? I'm going to recall and shuffle, and then we're going to draw 6 just to walk through it. Okay. 4 player characters, 2 plus the number 4 for 4 players. So we draw 6 cards, and then you decide together as a group and add a number of cards equal to half the size of the group, right? If there are 4 PCs in the party, you would add 2 cards. So every level, you're getting to add a couple of cards. What that means is the mix of your deck is changing, right? More of your deck becomes cards that are not these basic class inspiration cards, and you're gaining inspiration cards for a wider range of circumstances because each of them has a particular prompt or a particular type of situation that you use them in, right? So I've Had Worse says, when you have a few minutes to tend to your wounds, describe a serious injury you suffered in the past and how you pressed on despite the pain, and you clear 1d4 hit points. So this gives you that fun of, player characters talk about old injuries that they have, right? And they, trade war stories, or, they compare scars. And thinking about that allows the player character to take that endurance, that perseverance, and manifest it in play, reducing some of their, clearing some of the hit points that they've marked. Right? It's a very narrative-driven healing type of mechanic. So when we level up from level 1 to 2, right, we would pick 2 of these 6 cards. So you have a lot of choices, but then you're only adding a couple of cards, right? If you have a group of 3, then you're going to add 2 cards because Daggerheart is a game. Anyway, we always round up or down in Daggerheart. And I don't remember which one we do exactly at this moment because I'm on a stream. So do I say this says round up. So let's believe that's the case. If it's not, then I'm wrong. And we should round down because we should be consistent with the rules of the game as written. Otherwise, it'll be a weird exception. Right? So I would take these cards and I would add them. That means I add cards at level 2, level 3, level 4, and so on. Once I got to level 5, I would be drawing from the advanced draft supply with cards that are going to be more powerful or have maybe a broader impact. I have just a couple of advanced inspiration cards drafted. Right, so one of them, I don't have an example here because I didn't make the card, but one of them is, I like my odds. When there are any number of minions within close distance, describe how you dispatch them all and make an attack roll. On a success, all minions within close range are defeated. On a failure, you can mark a stress to still defeat 1d4 plus 1 minions within close range. So this is the idea, or the type of scene where a skilled or powerful character is surrounded by minions. And they're like, we've got you outnumbered 10-1, right? And the character says, I like my odds. Because they are that skilled and powerful, and they can just clear the room. Right? That's a very specific combat-oriented option for your inspiration cards. But they could be any number of situations. And the goal here is that, right, when this becomes a product, there's probably going to be somewhere in the territory of 50-something to 60-something inspiration cards across these different sections or these different categories. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can build your deck. You can pick certain types of cards that give you bonuses in certain types of situations. If your party has a little bit harder time generating hope because they don't have as many features that generate hope, you might take Health to the Company because it gives you another frequent or maybe infrequent source of additional hope. So you can pick and customize based on your players' preferences, based on how the characters are built, based on the type of story that you're telling, and so on. I could see a world where I then make special inspiration cards for Bastion of Hope, the campaign frame that I've created, and I'm going to be releasing as soon as layout is done, because life happens. And then I could make inspiration cards for the Witherwild campaign frame. A publisher could say, hey, Mike, can you make us inspiration cards for the campaign frames that we've made? And maybe that's a thing that I could do. Or they would make them themselves. Again, my goal here is to create a structure that then can be used more broadly. Depending on what my publishing plan for this is. That may or may not include more specific invitation to other people to add to this system. Because of the way that copyright works, to my understanding, because I'm not a lawyer, people can do this already right now, because you can't copyright mechanics. You can copyright exactly the way they are written and executed. So somebody could they could make something that goes just alongside that. And for the most part, it's going to be really unlikely that I'm going to throw a fit about that, right? Unless they're like actually terrible people and they're profiting from my idea in a way that then reflects poorly on me because they're doing terrible things with it. But something that I've tried to internalize is to largely not feel like I need to design defensively against bad faith. So instead, I think this is a fun idea. I hope I get to do more with it, and then it'll be fun to see how other people can use it, whether that's adding to it themselves or getting to work with them and adding inspiration cards to fit whatever it is that they're doing. Because these cards can be themed, right? They can be specific to elements of your campaign frame, right? There might be a card for the Witherwild campaign frame, because that's one that's in the SRD, where a faint divinity intervenes to help you in a certain situation. And so you describe which faint divinity it is, how they help you, and then what the mechanical benefit of that is, right? Because faint divinities are in the Daggerheart core book, but then they are specifically in the Witherwild campaign frame, right? I might have a inspiration card or some cards that are the intervention of Chore, goddess of freedom, from Bastion of Hope, right? Chore intercedes in a certain type of way, describe what happens, and here's this bonus that you get. One of the other key things in deck builders is removing cards from your deck. So I have a couple of ways to remove cards from your deck right now. And as I keep developing the idea, and especially as I get to playtest people adding these more powerful cards, whether they're the advanced inspiration cards or whether they are like special cards from a campaign frame or a setting or something, then removing some cards is going to become more key, because at a certain point in deck builders, you want to hone your deck in to be able to do very specific things. And because this is a subsystem instead of a core system, that necessity of honing the deck, I think, is a little bit less keenly felt. But I do like the idea of getting to be able to maybe weed out cards that didn't end up being as useful or as fun or as appropriate for your group, or for maybe a group to move past a lesson, right, where they've fully internalized it, and so it's no longer a notable exception. It's just kind of how things are for them. I don't know how that would work mechanically, but narratively, it makes sense. Right now, if a player character dies and there are no remaining PCs of that class, you might decide to remove their class inspiration from the deck. I'm torn on this because I also like the idea that even though this character is gone, the lessons that they taught us are still with us. And so we keep their class's inspiration. Like, oh, I'm going to do this like Hrothgar would, right? And I'm going to use the Ranger's inspiration. So I'm not totally decided on that. And then right now, it's when a PC dies, you can remove that, and the player of that PC that died can select and remove one other card from the inspiration deck. And then when the party gains a tier, not a level, a tier, so when you go to tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, you can select one card from the deck and remove it. Certain milestones or events in the campaign might also let a group get a chance to remove a card, right? Or there's a special situation where you get to draft, and then you also get to remove a card. There's a bunch of different opportunities and possibilities there because, again, this is a subsystem that sits on top of and interacts with existing mechanics without being load-bearing. One of the things I do when I'm thinking in terms of design technology is I think about interface points, right? Where does this deck building subsystem interact with the existing core system? Does it create a new point of friction or a time when the game slows down? What does it add? What does it rely on? What inputs are essential for it to operate, and what outputs does it generate? These inspiration cards output mechanical impacts on rolls. They output hope. They might output clearing stress. But those outputs are things that the game already generates through other mechanical interactions for the most part. And I think if you remove the inspiration deck at any point of the campaign, other material is not written in such a way that it relies upon or refers to the inspiration deck, because the inspiration deck is this supplementary or ancillary system, right? It is a subsystem that gets added. And very specifically, it's an optional subsystem, right? It could be fun if, if I get this to publication and it gets out there and it becomes wildly popular, right? And one of the things that players always ask, or ask frequently when they're starting a game of Daggerheart, is like, oh, are we using the inspiration deck? Can we use the inspiration deck? Now, that's a little getting ahead of myself, but I say this such that a thing that I don't think I want is for the inspiration deck to become so popular that other things that people make cannot be used unless you're using the inspiration deck. Because what I don't want is for people to feel like without the inspiration deck, part of the game breaks. But we'll see, right? If this becomes the most popular thing ever, and then in 5 years, Darrington is like, Mike, we're making Daggerheart 2nd edition, and we want to use the inspiration deck, right? I'll have that conversation. It's a pure hypothetical. Again, we're at an early stage with this. I'm thinking about some of the medium to long-term possibilities. I'm trying to think about what would the impact of this subsystem be, but it's still early on, so who knows? Right now I've got about 12 standard inspiration cards, right, for the draft supply, like these 6 here. I've play tested this a little bit, but only over the course of a couple of sessions. Part of the trick that's a challenge here is that I'm playtesting Drakkenheim, and I don't want to playtest any of my own creator-owned stuff alongside Drakkenheim, because the Drakkenheim stuff I'm getting paid for, right? It's under contract, and there's no expectation that this other stuff is going to be included in the Drakkenheim book. And so it doesn't make sense to mix, to cross the streams there. I want to playtest this stuff, but that would need to be part of a separate table. So that's one of the things I'm working on figuring out. I run 2 Daggerheart games right now on a regular basis, and then I play in one more. One of those is the Drakkenheim playtest. Do I convert the second one into a playtest for Inspiration Deck, or for my new classes, or maybe both, or something else? These are things that I will have to figure out. Something I am trying to be good about in terms of being conscious and mindful about is the fact that my brain has like roller coaster cycles where I think of things or I hear about things and I get excited and I commit to more things and more things and more things. And then I start having to do all of those things or maintain all of those things in terms of like a habit or an ongoing practice or repeating thing. And then I get overwhelmed and I crash. Maybe not capital B burnout, but I get overwhelmed. It's a bad place to be. And then I have to figure out how to pull back to a more manageable set of obligations. And then new things happen and I get excited and I add things and the cycle begins again. What I've been trying to do is identify when I'm adding a number of things and then tell myself, okay, hold on. Let's cool that down for a little bit and make sure we can maintain the new things we've already talked about before we keep adding new ones on. Because what will often happen is I will say yes to things, but they don't instantly start taking up time. I'm adding time I have to put into something in the future. I'm saying, yes, I'm going to take these meetings that are going to be here, here, and here, and we're going to require this such and such work. So I'm trying to not set myself up for a crash, especially because I have this big project in Drakkenheim that I'm very excited about and is important to me. But one of the things that keeps me energized as a designer is getting to also think about this weird stuff. Drakkenheim has given me plenty of opportunities to be ambitious in design. The specifics there I can't talk about yet, but the inspiration deck is the biggest, weird, different idea that I have that is creator owned, right? That is mine and is not promised to anybody, and that fits the concept of this design lab kind of approach. So we're at just about an hour. I think I want to leave this here, but if anybody has questions about the inspiration deck system as I've described it, or things that you feel like you still don't understand, you can let me know if you're here live. If you are watching on the VOD, I would encourage you to ask your questions over on YouTube, or you could ask them again at my Patreon, and that is patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood. If you like this weirder, how far can we push Daggerheart kind of design ideas, I would definitely invite you to become a member of my Patreon. The $10 and up tier, the Blade Crafter tier, named for Born to the Blade, the epic fantasy martial arts politics serial that I created and was lead writer on for Serial Box, now Realm.fm. At that level, you get posts that I make of really very early work in progress weird ideas like this, right? I've posted this for that level, and I've posted my GM classes early draft for that level. Also at that level, you will get the PDF of all of the self-published Daggerheart projects Daggerheart compatible projects, that I create. So Menagerie of Mayhem, which is coming very soon, Bastion of Hope, and things like that. Not a Hag asks, would you be able to create the deck for the Void classes? That's a great question. I don't know yet. Darrington Press will decide to what degree and how any material past the core rulebook is added to the SRD or is added as public game content such that you can create commercial projects for it, using the community gaming license. So I can't say yet. For now, I'm going to pretend that I cannot create material for those classes so that I don't set myself up for disappointment. Even though I think there's a real non-zero chance that some parts of things from Hope and Fear will be added. And I'm saying that not with any special knowledge, just I think there's always more than a 0% chance. But again, I don't have input on making that decision because I'm not staff at Darrington Press. Darrington Press is the ones who are going to make that decision, and they're going to make it knowing and thinking about a lot of things that would be hard for us outside the company to be able to consider. So we'll see. Right? I think it's very likely that Void classes that end up in Hope and Fear will end up on like Demiplane and the other VTTs and things. So people will engage with them. When I'm approaching stuff, I'm thinking, can I use it? Can I engage with this using the community gaming license? And I try to be really diligent about using that framework, even if there's maybe more looseness for some of that, if it's only ever homebrew and it's never published anywhere. So there you go. Yeah, right. I hope it works out. I think that there's a ton of interest and excitement about Daggerheart It was just announced earlier today, or I think that was published today. Some of you maybe saw it. Let me go and find the link. The Daggerheart is one of NPR's best games of 2025. Now, Mike, you say, I thought this best games of 2025 list was mostly a video game list. You would be correct, but Daggerheart is on there regardless. It was one of the best games so far for NPR in the list that they published in the summer, and I was delighted and honored to see that it made the end of year list as well. So thank you to the staff of NPR for that great kind of badge of recognition for the game. I cannot give these thanks on behalf of anyone except myself, but I am grateful, and that is very cool. So we're going to go back to here